Welcome to this week's End of Days Update, coming to you from Palm Springs, California. We had such a great time in Mount Pleasant, Michigan this last weekend. People were so hungry, great crowds, amazing. It's neat to see people so hungry for the coming of the Lord, amazing. Hey, if you're anywhere in the Southern California area, that's why I said we're coming to you from Palm Springs. Tonight will be, actually Thursday and Friday and Saturday, we'll be at the DoubleTree at the Hilton in Palm Springs with Ross Roberts, Ray Jean Wilson, meetings that we've been doing across the country. So come join us if you can. We're going to have so much fun. It's almost illegal how much fun it is, but we love to get into the Word and the preaching of the gospel. We'll have a wonderful time. So, and if next weekend, if you're anywhere near Dayton, we'll be in Dayton, Ohio, Sunday morning. That will be this coming Sunday. So if you're anywhere in the Dayton, Ohio area, please come join us. We'll have a great time. So we're coming to you every week to look at the different things that point to the coming of the Lord, specifically the gathering of nations for the Ezekiel 38 war, because that is so blatant, because the rapture is signless. The second coming has tons of signs, but the Ezekiel 38 war is a specific gathering of nations that come against Israel right after the rapture. Last week we got into how, all the players came together exactly in order, with Turkey doing what they needed to do, with Iran doing what they needed to do. It kind of freaked me out because I'd never seen them with the verbiage that they talked about this last week, and it really was what I've been waiting for. So let's pick up what's happened this week. You got a lot of things going on again. You've got finally with Netanyahu and Gantz, it looks like they're going to try to form a government pretty soon. They've been deadlocked on trying to figure out how to do that. I think another interesting was the thing that Turkey came out this week. They downed a drone on the Syrian border. They've pretty much made the decision to go it alone, to have a buffer system on the northern part of Syria. That doesn't sound like a big deal, but that's totally in line with what happens right after the rapture of the church. So these nations that are mentioned in that war are doing literally what they are supposed to do right now. So that is kind of bizarre. You had 5 earthquakes in the state of Missouri in the space of almost an hour this last week. You got all kinds of crazy things happening all over the world. You got the Netherlands and France basically coming out with toys that are gender neutral. I mean, you got things that the Bible talked about you'd see right before the coming of the Lord, the days of Noah, and you're definitely seeing that right now. But the specific thing is around Israel. Iran came out this week talking about, this is what the Revolutionary Guard said, we have Israel completely surrounded right now, and that means they're waiting for Israel to retaliate. Now, why are they waiting for Israel to retaliate? They believe that if they start a world war with Israel, it'll bring in their Messiah. Well, their Messiah is actually the Antichrist and does exactly what the Antichrist does. He even comes back, this is their doctrine, he comes back and Jesus comes with him, and Jesus says, I'm not the Son of God. But you see everything pushing toward that. Remember I talked about last week, Rouhani, every word he said in the interview was a lie. So this week, what do you have happening? You got more happening to set up that lie. You have the opening on the Syrian and Iraqi border. It's called Qam. There's a roadway there. That's where all the missiles that aren't necessarily being shipped into Syria are coming. They're coming on that roadway, and that opened back up this last week. I really watched for Israel to take a preemptive strike on that. And you had even some more strikes in Gaza and some more strikes up by Damascus. So you got constantly having rockets firing from Gaza, and you've got even more Iranian things happening around Damascus. Crazy thing about Damascus is one day we're going to wake up and it won't be there, because the Bible says in Isaiah that Damascus will be removed from being a city. So all this stuff has been happening a while, but the pressure on these is getting more detailed and more exact and more precise, because they're totally confronting Israel. The verbiage this last week is we're going to attack. Remember last week we talked about one of the bases that was on the border of Israel. So those guys still haven't moved out, even though they said they would. It is interesting to see Russia and Turkey making their alliances, and Turkey making new alliances about how to literally set Israel free. Last week, Turkey said, let's ascend to the Temple Mount and take Jerusalem for the Muslims. So, and basically protect the Palestinians. So you got the crazy verbiage for what's going to happen after we leave. So it is many, many, many more things happening with the weather, more things happening around the earth. I talk about George Soros. We don't talk about him very much, but this is how crazy it was with the elections. He was busing Muslims into areas to vote so that Benjamin Netanyahu wouldn't get elected again. So you see just weird underlying pressure to try to keep the correct people in position. But it is amazing that we're blessed to get to see all this stuff line up, one thing after another, because Jesus is about to come back. So what do? We go to the scriptures. Number one, you got Israel made a nation, then you got Jerusalem won back. Jesus said the generation that sees those events, those two events, will not pass away till all is fulfilled. But you have tons more. You got the Hebrew language restored. You got the Ethiopian Jews brought back. You got the fertility of the land of Israel. You got the Temple Mount Institute. They're there in position, ready to have sacrifices. You got 172 different species of predatory birds. You had Ezekiel prophesy 2,700 years ago that fish would show up in the Dead Sea. That happened this year. You had foxes on the Temple Mount a few weeks ago. That's from Lamentations 5:18, that it's desolate and it's time for the third temple to be rebuilt. So tangible physical things happening that point to His return. Remember, Jesus rebuked the Pharisees over and over and over again. Never rebuked the crowd but one time. The only time Jesus rebuked the crowd is when they didn't know their hour of their visitation. He said, you can tell what the weather is going to be, but you don't know your hour of visitation. So He wants us to know. So all these things are about how close we are. I hear people say, well, we don't really need to know about the coming of the Lord. Tell a quarterback that in the last 2 minutes of a football game. There's plays designed for those 2 minutes. There's a thought pattern in those 2 minutes of urgency. So getting into all these details about the coming of the Lord, there's one thing about it, is to accelerate before the coming of the Lord. It's not an escape theology. It's a hustle theology. Because you have all these tangible signs. There's many, many more. I mean, there's sign after sign after sign after sign. Men will be lovers themselves with selfie sticks. You go from signs, though, which are pretty dramatic, to signals. The Lord's so sweet. You got blood red moons on Passover and Tabernacles a few years ago. When's the last time you had 4 in a row on Passover and Tabernacles? That's called a tetrad, what NASA called it. The last time you had those 4 in a row on Passover and Tabernacles is in 1967 when Jerusalem was won back. 1948 when Israel was made a nation. In 1492 at the Edict of Expulsion when the Jews were kicked out of Spain. So remarkable that the heavens are signaling this. And then you had the Bethlehem star last year. First time in 2,000 years. Jupiter, Regulus, and Venus. Pretty amazing to have it 2,000 years later. The first time the constellation was Virgo. This last year the constellation was Leo. He's the lion of the tribe of Judah. So what do? We have signals. We have signs. Many more happening right in front of our eyes. What do we do as the church? We hustle. Let's do as much as we can to get as many people born again as we possibly can, because Jesus is just about to come back. Wow, amazing that we're the generation when all of these verses are coming to pass. I hear people say, well, you can't tell when the Lord's coming back. Yet, He put more verses in the Bible about what it would look like right before He comes. Why? So we would have a heads up and we would not be downtrodden. He said, lift up your heads, your redemption is drawing nigh. So what do? Help our local church, help our local pastor, get the message out. What do we have to do to be engaged more? That's the whole thing about the church in the last days. It seems like just kind of on cruise. No, we have to be engaged and do the will of God. Jesus is just about to come. We'll come back next week. We'll pick up with all the stuff that's happening around Israel that point to His return, because we're so blessed. We're about to see Jesus face to face. Have a blessed, awesome week. We'll see you next Wednesday.
Thanks for joining us today at the End of Days Update. If you'd like to be notified every time there's a new post, just go to the EDU at josephmorris.com and subscribe to receive email alerts. If these posts and updates have been a blessing to you, please consider making a one-time donation to help get the message out, or even becoming a monthly partner with Joseph Morris Ministries. Thanks again for tuning in to the EDU, and we'll see you next week.